Driver, start your engine!
Good evening, race fans. Welcome to the Leaders Zoo Radio Network. Welcome to the Draft Room Circuits program. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we talk about this past week in racing and racing news and preview next week for you. Joining me in the studio, Richard Youden, Luis Torres. Guys, how we doing, man?
Good, thank you. Good.
Feels great to be a part of Gino's season, which is a positive.
So, we did have a big weekend of racing, all three major series in action. IndyCar wrapping up their season, NASCAR's playoffs getting underway, and you know, Formula One deep into their season as well. But the most compelling racing news involves some off-track activity that involves Kyle Busch. In one of the worst kept secrets of recent vintage is now official that he will be leaving Joe Gibbs Racing. He will be leaving Toyota, and he will be a Richard Childress driver next year, taking over the number 8 car that's currently driven by Tyler Reddick. Now, what happens to Reddick? There's some questions that need to be answered there because they still have Reddick under contract for another season before he departs to become a Toyota driver with 23XI Racing in 2024. So, the long and short of it is, I believe that this is it's a good move for Childress. Their team went through a pretty long dry spell, but they've been improving as of late, and getting a top guy in like a Kyle Busch can only help. They had a pretty good season this year. That both their drivers won races. Both their drivers made the playoffs. And this is again following a pretty long drought they had for a time after in the post Harvick years. So Louise, your thoughts on this move with Kyle Busch is pretty big news, and there's a lot of real varied reactions from people that think it's the greatest thing in the world to people that are just absolutely horrified that Richard Childress would compare Kyle Busch to the late great Dale Sr.
If you were to tell me in 2011 that Kyle Busch and Richard Childress would join forces at some point in the future, I would have laughed, considering they were coming to blows at that point after a minuscule truck race where Kyle Busch rough fenders with Joey Coulter. I would have laughed, but today, not so much. It kind of shows you how maturity and kind of the market value is. There's like when an opportunity arises to get a top tier driver, sure, not the top guy in terms of performance right now. You could arguably say there's a couple drivers that are ahead of Kyle Busch pound for pound performance, but the raw talent is there. And I think what RC saw in Kyle is like as soon as the announcement was made that Reddick was going to go to 2311 in 2024, you go for the best driver available. And Kyle Busch is the top free agent that they have in NASCAR, probably the biggest in a long time. And for RCR to get Kyle Busch is a huge get. That obviously causes a massive ripple effect all across the board, right? And all three national touring divisions when you really think about it, because what Kyle RCR gets is Kyle Busch taking that 8 car that Tyler Reddick has done phenomenal all season long. What the question was, can he elevate that team? And that's the biggest thing for me. Can he elevate a race team to the next level? We've seen a number of cases what Kirk can do with any team he jumps in. He finds a way to make them better. We don't know about Kyle because he's been at Joe Gibbs Racing since 2008 onwards. And when he tried to do his own thing in Xfinity, that didn't quite work out so well for him as far as the wins column. The question is how you do deep in his 30s with RCR. That's the big question that I have. And the truck program, KBM, is going to go from to the Chevy, which obviously the TRD program is a huge unknown, because when you look at it, the driver development, Venerini is exclusively ARCA. Bill McAnally Racing was their pipeline for a few years in regionals before they went to Chevy. And now with KBM going to Chevrolet, who they got left? They have ThorSport, they have a Torres to look at. But whether or not they're going to put a lot of money into that, it remains unknown. And what does it mean for guys like John Hunter Nemechek, Corey Heim, and Chandler Smith? Where do they go afterwards? That's a huge mystery that will be talked about for months to come in my book.
Yeah, again, like you said, huge ripple effect. Then of course the other thought is, okay, so now there's the opening at Joe Gibbs Racing. Obviously, the heir apparent to that seat would be young Ty Gibbs. Nothing official there yet, but they've been grooming him for to join that team for quite some time, and I think it was just a matter of whether it would be Truex, Hamlin, or Kyle stepping aside first, and Kyle made the first move there. So that seat is open, likely be Ty Gibbs. We do know Tyler Reddick is contracted to 23XI Racing in 2024, although there's a big question of whether or not Kurt Busch is going to be healthy enough to return to that 45 car to compete next season. And if he's not, I suppose the possibility exists that they try to buy Childress out of Reddick's contract a year early. Otherwise, Childress did say that Reddick would be in a Childress car. Might not be RCR. It could be they could farm him out to a colleague or something like that, or they could make the guy step down to Xfinity, I suppose, if they'd like. But again, that may actually void the contract. But that's another moving part there. We'll have to see where that goes. A lot hinges on Kurt Busch's health. Obviously, 23XI has not given up on Kurt returning yet, but just the long recovery period, and it's you've got to start to say, maybe this is the end of racing for Kurt.
Yeah, which would be a shame on all intents and purposes for Kurt if his career ends prematurely, because as I mentioned, he's one of the more better top drivers pound for pound. As I mentioned, how he elevates race teams, in which we don't know much about Kyle because we've only seen him in Joe Gibbs or his own equipment for a huge chunk of his career. So it'll be curious to see if that trade works well for adapts well for Kyle. And as far as Ty Gibbs is concerned, I think had it not been what he's shown to do so far in his Cup career, filling in for Kurt, I don't think we'd be discussing as that much about Ty right now, but either or it's going to be discussed. The question is, when will that happen? It could be at the offseason, or it could be 2 weeks before the Clash, for all we know. Knowing how Ty Gibbs in the past, how he handles or how the team handles silly season rumors and speculations, they wait till the bitter end of the offseason to announce this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the fewer distractions during the playoffs, the better. And speaking of the playoffs, we did have a playoff race in Kansas. Another very tough day for Kevin Harvick, who remains at the bottom of the standings. He got, they got put into the wall a little early. Another miserable finish for Kyle Busch, who's down there below the cut line as well. But another non-playoff driver taking the win, and that being Bubba Wallace, who, to his credit, he drove a fantastic race. He really did.
Yeah.
He
held his zone quite well in a car
sure did. Yeah.
Yeah, in the car that Kurt won at Kansas, he really held his own. He kind of bounced back from adversity because of what you mentioned about Harvick. He was kind of in the accordion effect of him, Chastain, and Harvick that kind of led to Harvick's exit. But Bubba really held his own, and on a technical note, from an owner's championship perspective, that 45 car has advanced to the next round. Because that was the big thing. Like with Kurt out of the picture for the drivers, the owners they decided to switch Bubba from the 23 to the 45 to kind of groom him to get him acclimated to a playoff scenario. Because one of the biggest things about Bubba is that he's very hard on himself. Yours truly is hard on himself on a lot of things, but he really set the tone and he held his own to the fact that he was able to fend off because Denny Hamlin and Christopher Bell were his true threats, but he found a way to held the pressure really good. He dealt it perfectly, and he now puts them in and around the 12 in the Owners' Championship, which is excellent and kind of showcases that the guy can drive. Yeah, so maybe silence all some of the critics that he can only do good in plate tracks, super speedways, and
Or if it rains,
yeah, I mean,
So yeah, here's a guy with, way too many critics. For a guy who's actually shown a lot of improvement week after week after week. If you just take all your whatever preconceived notion you have out of your mind and just honestly look at the man's performance, he's doing everything that he should be doing at where he is in his career, which is including winning races. And here you go. And this is this is the kind of race that should shut up his critics, right? But it won't, because people are nuts and they have their own biases and whatnot that they're going to cling to. This he only won because he's in Kurt's car. I'm like, well, it's just a number swap. Honestly, he's still with his own crew and his own guys, correct?
Yeah, Booty Barker is now a two-time Cup winning crew chief. And talk about a guy that I think we talked about it after Talladega. He's been a journeyman crew chief. He's worked with the likes of Scott Wimmer, Dave Blaney, Casey Mears, a litany of other drivers, and now he's basically, you could arguably say he's in a team that can compete for wins as a top caliber team that is growing. Because that was never any doubt that 23XI were going to go out and get wins. It's taken them some time. Yeah, luck has been a thing. Pit stops have been a burden, but they're putting the pieces together to the point that we may have to keep an eye on Bubba next year as far as being a pretty good threat of being have a good playoff run. We'll see how he does in the next month or so. See if that 45 team could go further in the playoffs and surprise more people as well.
Yeah. So for a second year Cup team, this is their third overall win. We had a Talladega last year with Bubba, and then both Kansas races, Kurt winning the one earlier in the season and Bubba winning this past weekend. So, development-wise for a second-year team, I'd say they're ahead of the curve. Obviously, Toyota doesn't have tons of team the wealth is shared pretty evenly amongst the Toyota teams there. So they're getting great support. They're getting good equipment, and the team is very well funded, which is always the most important thing when it comes to performance. It's always like somebody, who was it? Roger Penske, you just say, what wins the race is cubic dollars, not cubic inches. Yeah. But kudos to them, to that whole team, that's coming out of the weekend looking great. But, so going into the cutoff race, right, we have Christopher Bell leading the points.
Yeah, this is one guy that I think I recall saying he'd be the first four out.
Yeah.
Because he's just been very on the low quiet all year.
He's locked in, I think, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the only one locked in.
Bell's locked in.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. A few more will lock themselves in after stage one, barring any drama.
neither of the wins have been by people in the playoffs, are they? So
correct.
So he's locked in. And I think, as you say, literally probably another 4 or 5 get locked in just by completing stage one and finishing in the top 10. So,
right, yeah, but
then there's like 6 drivers down at the bottom that are all covered by about 18 points. I think it is 15 points, which is nothing, especially at a place like Bristol.
Yeah, you got to have like Suarez, Austin Dillon, Cindric, Harvick's the one and
Reddick and Kyle Busch are both down there. Yeah, so you could have a couple of big names go out.
Yeah, and then Harvick's nearly in a must-win situation here.
Really, he doesn't have to, but it's going to be close.
It's
37 points out, I think.
So,
he's half a race behind in terms of points.
Well, so we're on to Bristol. No dirt this time, just our traditional Bristol concrete. So, Louise, who do you like for Bristol?
I think it's hard to go against with. I honestly, that's a good question. I say Blaney if he had a little thing called luck at Bristol, which he doesn't. So scratch Blaney off of my priority list. I think this has the writing of a Elliott win, I think.
Yeah, and he's another guy. He's deeper in the points than he'd like to be, especially since he came in leading this thing. I don't think he's in danger of being cut off, but a win would certainly swing some momentum back his way during the playoff here. So, and me, I'll go out on a limb and say that Harvick turns it all the way around and wins the thing and says there. So, or he'll be the first guy out again. Either one. So. Feast or famine there. So let's move on to IndyCar. But before we do, there was one other interesting little tidbit in the Kyle Busch news that Kyle Busch had casually mentioned as well. That he says, well, now I'm free to compete in the Indy 500 if I'd like to, because the only guy telling me I couldn't do it was my former boss, being Coach Joe Gibbs. So Louise, you have some thoughts on who might be interested to put Kyle Busch in their Indy 500 car?
Yeah, when you look down the roster, here are the Chevy teams. You have Penske, AJ Foyt, Ed Carpenter, Juncos, Hollinger. They're going to expand to a second car team. Arrow McLaren and Peretta. But Peretta has ties with ECR, so in theory, those are your options. McLaren to me sounds ideal, but it's just a hot mess, Euphoria style. I want to put that on hold to see how that unfolds, because they still have to deal with Rossi-Quist and Pelot's contracts to see where they'll end up, whether Pelot goes to Ganassi or actually goes to McLaren, or where Rossi-Quist, who finished in the top 10 in points, stays in IndyCar for one more year, or he gets sent to Formula E. So
here's the latest on Rosenqvist right now.
Yeah.
This was from earlier today. Zach Brown on record saying that if they can't find him, he's number one. He said he'd love to keep Felix on the IndyCar team, but he said, but if they don't have an IndyCar seat for him, he is free and clear to talk to whoever he'd like to. And there have been a number of teams in contact with Felix for his services, because the guy really came on strong the second half of the year. He's very experienced. He knows what he's doing. He's a good guy. He's good for the series. He's good with car development. So I feel quite confident that we'll see Felix in the IndyCar series next year. Whether or not it's McLaren, we don't know.
Yeah, but it's just the whole thing with McLaren right now. I don't see it per se, and I don't see it right now. And Ed Carpenter, they got their hands full. Of course, Ed runs the 500. They got the thing with Peretta. So Juncos, they're just starting a second car team. I think they should probably go for a veteran to further develop the car and kind of build Ilott to be even stronger next year, which they're capable of doing. Based on what we saw the second half of the year with Ilott, or all throughout the year, if it's not reliability problems, the car can go get some top 10 runs out of it. And then you have Foyt, which right now the only ones that we know that's going to be with Foyt is just Dalton Kelley. It's just a matter or not he'll be in the 4 again or in the 14 and vice versa. Penske is the one I can see happy, because, if we remember not that long we were talking about how Roger will try to do what he can to get Larson in the Indy 500. I imagine he's going to willing to do the same thing for Kyle Busch here. And put him in the Ford car. It's just a matter of can they put a Ford car, because right now when you look at it, the Indy 500, Penske has not been sunshine and rainbows as of late, especially in qualifying.
Yeah, they were pretty miserable the last 2 years. But they were strong everywhere else. So I don't think that they're going to be inclined to add that fourth car to the lineup. I mean, they haven't done it the past couple of years since they let Elio go.
Yeah, and Elliott was tremendous in those one-offs.
But honestly, Penske seems to operate at its optimum as a 3-car operation. Every time they've tried to expand to 4, the results have not been as solid as when they're running 3. I think 3 is just the magic number for them.
Yeah, and it clearly shows when we talk about how the finale unfolded and just the team in general. They led the series in wins with 9 out of 17.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of quickly pick up that something you were talking about, obviously, with Kyle's move to away from the Toyota camp and away from Joe Gibbs Racing, and opening up the opportunity to run the Indy 500 and the Coke 600 on the same day. that to me is perfect justification why Toyota, are not screaming in, frustration that he's gone. I've spoken about this on the show before. Are you a NASCAR driver or are you an IndyCar driver? You can't pick one or the other. Go run the Indy 500 when you've retired from NASCAR. Great, don't have a problem with that. Do what Jimmy Johnson's done if that's what you want to do. But I fully back the NASCAR team owners that invest millions of dollars in a guy who then turns around and says, well, I want to jeopardize my performance in the 600 by going off to run the 500 as well on the same day. It just smacks of unprofessionalism to me. But I guess just purely my opinion on that one. But I think that is a key highlight to one of the reasons why, the Toyota and Joe Gibbs Racing will be like, okay, well, we're going to move on from this. We're not going to cry in our cornflakes too long over this move.
Yeah, yes. I mean, it'd be interesting to see if Kyle actually does it. Because the racing landscape is littered with guys that have talked about doing the double and never have. You keep hearing these same names mentioned over and over again. Only a couple people have actually done it. So. Anyway, so the IndyCar season finale, Will Power ended up winning the championship with another solid drive to the podium. And again, just Power this season, he came in with a new attitude, a calmer, quieter, a more focused Will Power. The guy, he completed every lap this season, no DNFs, lead lap every race. He was in the top 4 finishing positions, and I think 12 or 13 of the 17 races. Yeah. Whereas, people say, well, look at Newgarden won 5 races that couldn't. I say, yeah, but it was feast or famine for Newgarden. When he's not finishing first, he's, 23rd, 25th, 18th. And those are the kind of things that you can't build a championship season on. And I'll just say this to people that want to try to somehow tarnish, Will's championship by saying he only won 1 race. Well, there's a couple of seasons back in the early part of the 2000s and 2010s where Will Power won the most races and still lost the championship to guys like Dario Franchitti and Ryan Hunter-Reay because those guys were more consistent over the course of the season. So, and this is literally Will just figuring this out to say, this is my approach. This is how I'm going to do it. And his consistent finishing is what kept him atop those points. There's nothing highly flashy about it, but you figure, Tom Sneva won the championship in 78, didn't even win a race. Al Unser Sr. won 2 championships in the 80s, only winning 1 race this season. So it's not like it's a new phenomenon that, and the funniest comment I heard was somebody says, oh, it's ridiculous that Newgarden didn't win. They need to use Formula 1 points to, so that the win means more. So somebody quickly figured up. They said, yeah, even with Formula 1 points, Will Power still wins.
Yeah, because of those top 5 finishes.
Yeah, because most of your non-playoff type races reward consistency. So there you go. So I mean, great job to Will, his second title. He also broke the record for most pole positions in the history of IndyCar. Knocked Mario Andretti down to second. Mario was the first guy there to congratulate him, and that was a beautiful little moment there, because Will was almost apologetic, and just you could tell he was just humbled to be compared to such an icon of motorsport. And Mario was nothing but happy to see his record fall to a guy like Will Power, who's been literally the king of qualifying. If you figure he's been in the series since, if you count his champ car years, 2007 or so, right?
2006
or 7, right? So it's 2022 now, 68 poles. That's 3 to 4 poles a year. Every year. So that's just that's talk about a man who knows how to throw down a qualifying lap. That's your guy.
Yeah, for sure, and that does come a long way when you qualify good, because there's teams that can qualify good and more often than not they'll finish good. If you don't qualify that well, you can scratch your claw to get a good result, but championship contenders is kind of puts you at reach. You look at you can look at several teams that struggle to qualify but find a way to climb up the leaderboard. But imagine if they were to get better and we'll look at a much competitive landscape, but we still see a competitive landscape. Like I mentioned earlier, Penske won 9 of those races. Out of those 9, only 1 was from Will Power. But we still had 9 different winners still. So the parity is still there. We've not had a title clincher before the finale since 05, I believe.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's crazy how many years before the that the titles it comes down to the last race. But that's again, part of it that is the spec series and it's so competitive and so driver driven when it comes to because if you look at some of these lap times during the qualifying, you got like the top 18, 20 guys separated by just hundredths. Sometimes it's just that close. And for Will to pull that little extra to get that pole 68 times in his career is amazing.
For sure. And of course, I have to say 68 plus 1 Surfer Paradise 08, but obviously that don't count the 08. But that's besides the point. But yeah, that's the thing about Will Power. He finally put a whole season together of strong runs. Not like, had it not been for this or had he got going at a certain time. No, he put a whole season together. Whereas you look at the other 4 title contenders, you could pinpoint one of the races that they had it gone different, they would have looked different. Newgarden, second Iowa race. Dixon, Indy 500. Ericsson needed to show up a little bit more towards the bitter end because he kind of faded away in my book. And then McLaughlin, Indy 500, that midseason skid. While all of that happened, Will Power was still racking up top 5s more often than not.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about Newgarden for a second because he had a very strong run, but he made a very uncharacteristic mistake in qualifying where he hit this little metal pyramid that they put in the curve to keep you from going too far off the curve. So what did he do? Went too far off the curb and hit it, which kind of vaulted his car a little bit up the hill. And then he got it kind of high-ended and pretty much ended up starting next to last because he didn't advance out of that session. And then to make matters worse, he didn't. I think he didn't realize that his car was totally stuck and his front wheels were actually off the ground and he wouldn't get out of the car as the clock is expiring for the rest of the guys trying to set a good time there. So he wrecked some other guys qualifying runs as well in that. So he had to start from the back, but he, through strategy and just hard driving, carved his way up there. Ended up finishing second, but in first place was Alex Palou, who was in another time zone. I believe he was nearly 30 seconds ahead.
Over 30.
By the end of the race there. So Palou, that's his first win on the season, and maybe this ends his career with Chip Ganassi. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I don't know how they're getting along now. I've heard very little about how the court cases are shaping up. I believe a lot of this litigation is still yet to be heard by a judge or a arbitration panel or however that all works. So, but either way, great way to cap off the season for Palou there, taking a very convincing win there.
Yeah.
So, yep.
It's another dominant victory for Honda. Obviously, the last couple times have been Colin Herta, but this time it's Alex Palou was able to get the job done. And I think it's a bittersweet end to his championship defense because I was contemplating whether or not he'll win this season after Portland being a complete afterthought to the point of not being a contender at all. That it's just going to end like that, just be a complete afterthought. But in the end, he still gets a top 5 championship trail ahead of, actually, he finished ahead in points over Marcus Ericsson, mind you. So it's a good way to cap off in a strong, dominant fashion after going a year without a win because it's been, I think it would have been almost exactly a year because Portland was not on Labor Day weekend last year. It fell in the time that Laguna took place last Sunday. So kudos to Palou, and we'll see how his 2023 status looks like, whether he's going to be a Ganassi or McLaren.
Yeah, that'll be a developing story in the offseason. So, Richard, you're quiet over there. So you get to watch any of the IndyCar finale there?
Yeah, I watched, quite a bit of it. And, it was I wouldn't say a processional race in some ways, but from championship standpoint, Will Power knew exactly what he needed to do, and he did it pretty damn well, didn't he? He was always in control the whole weekend. Got that good commanding lead early at the start, and then just did what he needed to do from there, and and held it together. So huge credit goes to Will. And excuse me, as you say, didn't get the most wins in this championship by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly the consistency there with the number of top 5 finishes. I think there was only a couple of races where he finished outside the top 5. So, a fantastic achievement there, really, for him. Definitely somebody that you look at when he hangs up his helmet, you'd want him to have won more than one championship for sure. So, really, really good to see.
Yeah, he's pretty much checked off most of the boxes that an IndyCar driver would like to, which is championship, multiple championship, and Indy 500 record for poles. Yeah, so yeah.
But you look at it, you still look at it, and you still look at Scott Dixon sort of that's that 1 mile an hour speeding penalty at Indy. It cost him. And that'll still nag at him, I'm sure. No, incredibly frustrating for him, really. Because again, Will and Will Power and Scott Dixon, I think, are 2 drivers that are cut from pretty much the same mold in terms of how they go about their success. It's just doing it sounds horrible, but it's not the case. Doing the bare minimum to win, and it's just going through the motions. And that speeding penalty is a real kicker for him.
Absolutely, yeah. So, in other news, Callum Ilott qualified on the front row. Obviously he wasn't able to capitalize on that with the mechanical, but man, what a boost for Youden Racing, and that's Callum Ilott. He's your countryman, right? That must have felt pretty good to see him up on the first row. Must have been a giant boost for that team. Who's traditionally, they're probably I would say they're the second most underfunded, smallest team on the grid after Paretta. Probably. So good qualifying result for them.
But they have announced that they're going to a 2-car team next year, haven't they? If I'm correct in saying that.
Yes,
they got a second car in the works.
There's still so obviously there's some money floating around there, and it's starting to grow. And which is great for the series, great for the sport. That you are getting more full-time teams out there, and people are getting more involved, and obviously sponsors are getting more interested in the series. So it's baby steps, but it's really, really good for the sport overall.
Yeah, and considered, like I mentioned a bit earlier, the second half they started clicking off, and I think had certain things gotten a little bit better on the reliability and also polished some errors, Isla probably would have been a top 20 points finisher this season, even a little higher than 20th in points.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but at the end of the day, the rookie of the year went to Christian Lundgaard, who you got to credit him. Great first full season for him. Great result for the Rahal team, who has been they've been really up and down over the years. So nice positive mojo for them as well. And,
definitely on Lundgaard there. I've got a sort of a special interest in that guy because I'm very good friends with his race engineer there, and but that whole team's on the up in many ways. They've got a new facility either opened or just about to open in Indianapolis. They have a lot of good work going on in the LMP series with BMW and some of the prototype racing. So a lot of really good noises coming out of that organization, and it'll be interesting to see how they continue to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's it's a good way to finish off the season. Now, the biggest disappointment out of Rahal is got to be Jack Harvey. Everybody thought this guy was, ever since that Texas practice crash, he's been completely MIA. I can say that about a lot of drivers.
Kirkwood's second half was miserable in my book, completely miserable. Meyer Shank had a rather disappointing season with both drivers in my book. It's just a lot of disappointing stuff. Like I expected to do better, but we'll see how they do next year. But Harvey was a huge disappointment on all accounts because I thought he'd be a top 15 points finisher, maybe get a podium out of it. Instead, what we saw is Lundgaard really lighting up, which doesn't come as a surprise because I did have him as my rookie of the year pick going in the off season, and he sure did deliver. Took him a bit, but that second half it seems like it clicked on him, and he was able to have a superb run in Laguna to lock it up over David Malukas.
Yeah. Malukas, another guy with a great rookie season, had a podium on the year. It looks like he'll be returning to Foyt, and then the team
Coin.
is Coin. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's excuse me. And it looks like actually the team that his father owns, that is affiliated with Foyt, they're going to increase their Indy Lights effort to 5 cars. So that's another bit of side news. But another bit of side news: Linus Lundqvist wins the Indy Lights titles. And here's a little interesting tidbit. By winning the Indy Lights title this year, right, finishing third in Indy Lights last year, right, and then winning the Formula Regional Americas championship in 2020, Linus Lundqvist actually has enough points for a super license. And Colton Herta still does not. And so which segues me to the Colton Herta news is that the FIA is very unlikely to make any exception for Colton Herta. Colton Herta and Brian Herta are not going to press the issue. There's a little talk of maybe he'll do a winter series.
Yeah, could do
Europe somewhere. Yeah,
Asia, isn't there? There's a lot of these Asian series, but again, I still don't know if there's been enough. But
I think
there's talk of him doing an outing with Alpine as well.
But it looks increasingly like Colton Herta will spend next year where he spent this year being in that Andretti car, and really,
is it enough?
Well, he needs to focus on winning the championship. Because if he wins it, that's
hasn't he been focused on doing that the last 2 or 3 years?
Evidently not.
I mean, I'm not trying to be be a smart ass here, but
he just needs to take a really good hard look at how Will Power handles himself, and maybe take a good look at how Scott Dixon handles himself, and maybe kind of pattern himself after that a little bit. And that again, that comes with maturity and whatnot. But I read the stat that Lundqvist is qualified for a super license and Herta is not, and I found that just to be you know what I mean. But that's the difference between winning these championships and winning a couple races and still finishing 9th and 10th in the standings. So.
Yep.
Again, but that's a good segue into Formula One, where we were at Monza, another great historic.
Well, hang on. So I was just looking at this. Sorry, talking about.
Okay.
So there's the there's the Formula Regional Asian Championship, which gets 10 super license points.
He did the Formula Regional Americas,
which I believe this is coming up this 10. Winter.
This winter. Right. Yeah.
And that's the Formula 3 cars, which are pretty underpowered compared to what he'd be used to, but you'd like to think he'd be in a pretty good position to, compete with that. And they go between Dubai, Kuwait City, Yas Marina circuits from mid-January to late February. So, and that supports the Formula 4 Championship. So it's goodness me. If you can get that, then
he'd have to align himself with a team capable of winning that championship.
I'm sure that would be pretty easy.
Right? And then he'd have to win that championship, and then he'd have enough points because he's only 8 points shy right now. If he gets 10, yeah. So there you go.
Now, or he could do the the Formula 4 Championship, which is 12 super license points. So I don't know how long they go throughout the season, though. Yeah, they're the same dates, so he may do that one. There's four teams entered into that, and only 2 drivers announced so far. So I mean, if they're but then that takes a huge risk from, because that'll then eat into your Formula 1 pre-season testing, I would have thought as well. So, there's a big risk to take that.
Yeah. So we'll just have to see how all that pans out. So, but so Monza, we got Tifosi got to see a Ferrari driver on the pole. And I guess one of the bigger stories, other than Max winning the 5th race in a row, Nick DeVries filling in for Alex Albon. Albon having some health issues. He had, I believe they had to rush him to the hospital to take his appendix out. And then I believe he had some sort of respiratory distress or respiratory failure after the surgery. So pretty scary situation for Albon. He was forced to sit out the race, and Nick DeVries filled in and did a nice job, by the way, gaining points in the Williams car.
Did more than nice, didn't he?
Exactly. Yeah.
Fantastic job.
But last I read is that Albon is released from the hospital and headed back home. So, and he just wants to focus on getting well for the next round. But pretty scary moment for Albon there.
Yeah.
That could have ended. That could have ended. Worse. Yeah.
But thankfully not. So hopefully you can make a swift recovery and be back in time for Singapore in a few weeks.
Yeah, during the birthday weekend. But yeah, going back to DeVries, I said that was a huge statement and debut, because we talked about how certain drivers that you can look at, he could be F1 ready. He won the F2 championship on what was a trying year for the sport, because that was the year that Antoine Hubert passed away in 2019, and we talked about how Felipe Drugovich, who locked up the F2 title, also the F3 title was decided in Monza, where he may not even end up in Formula One, period, because there's no quality rides available where he could develop, or the sponsorship money may not be there for Drugovich, as far as I know.
Yeah, but as far as DeVries is concerned, I bet a certain Nicholas Latifi is very nervous.
I mean, he put him to school, didn't he?
Yeah, he got points in this. He showed he showcased that he put it in the round. He put it in Q2, whereas Latifi was admired in Q1, eliminated after Q1 yet again. And to point this out, Latifi still has yet to score a top 10 this season. Everyone else, excluding Hulkenberg, because he only drove for Vettel for that one race, I think, that 1 or 2 races to start off the year. Latifi's still the only one without a point. Yeah, that speaks volumes.
Latifi's been, unfortunately, I mean, I hate criticizing drivers because they're damn good at what they do in the grand scheme of things, but it hasn't been good. And you saw Albon through free practice 1 and free practice 2. I think he made top 10 in both free practice 1 and free practice 2, which was impressive. Given the historical performance of the Williams car. And then so you think, DeVries is coming in. He started in the top 10 after a number of penalties, but it was like he still Latifi still didn't really get anywhere close to him. And it wasn't good.
No, not a good look for Latifi. Nope, not at all. But so take us through the race itself. Max didn't start real close to the front. He started 7th or?
Yeah, 7th with a penalty. There was a penalty. Easy for you to say. Strategic engine penalties and gearbox penalties and power unit penalties at this time of season. And as we saw in, I think it was Spa, wasn't it, where Max cut through the field, to get a win. It was very, very similar. And, what can you say, really? I mean, Ferrari didn't make a mistake. The strategy was solid. They had to do what they did. And they just weren't quick enough. It's a harsh reality of what it is, but they did what they needed to do, and Red Bull were very, very impressive. To win the 3 races coming away from the off-season break, it sort of starts to remind you a little bit of 2012 when I think Red Bull won every race post summer break. So it's ominous. I mean, I think actually technically Verstappen could win the championship in Singapore next weekend or in 2 weeks' time if he wins, and I guess none of his nearest rivals finish the race. So it's very, very difficult to poke holes in them. But as a race itself, Leclerc got a good start and led away. From Russell, Russell hung on for a little bit, but there was that constant gap. And then through the pit stop cycles and some of the strategy calls, Max got started to get close and was, closing on Leclerc. Leclerc decided to stop and try and take some soft tires to see if he could have a run at Verstappen towards the end of the race, but Verstappen just kept him at arm's length for the whole time there. And then of course we had the little bit of controversial finish to the race. I think it started with about 10-15 laps to go, maybe, when I think it was Valtteri Bottas retired, if I'm correct in saying there, with an engine failure of some sort, and that was reacted to under a safety car, virtual safety car situation, whereby the marshals could just push the car through one of the openings in the barrier. But then with about 5 or 6 laps to go, Danny Ricciardo, who again was struggling, he's in the points, but still not incredibly impressive, unfortunately. Throughout the weekend, he was struggling and had another engine retirement, and his, unfortunately, car stopped between the two Lesmos, I think it was there, which was a very hard position to get the car off the track. The sort of auto neutral that these cars should have to allow the marshals to push the car failed, which does happen. So it required the tractor to come onto the track to help remove the car, which was an automatic safety car. And unlike Abu Dhabi last year, which I think is where some of the controversy and happiness comes from, they actually followed the letter of the rules correctly in this instance. And they weren't able to restart the race, so the race finished under a safety car, which I don't think anybody likes to see, but those are the rules which everybody signed up for and nobody should be surprised about. We sort of, Max is the winner and we sort of move on. Was it the right way of finishing the race? It's difficult to say. If they'd stopped the race with 3 laps to go and had like a NASCAR style shootout, people would complain about that. You're trying to manipulate it. If they want the race to finish as a race, then they have to look at, the sporting regulations, because at the moment the stewards did exactly what they were meant to do. So nobody's ever going to be happy, all the time in these situations. But
no, this is always one of those things that you be careful what you wish for, So yeah. They complain when they stop a race, you're manipulating them, but then they complain when you finish. And to Formula One's credit, they rarely finish a race under a safety car.
The most previous one I can think of was, there was one in the early 2000s, I think it was at Silverstone, wasn't it, where Schumacher took his penalty in the pit lane on the last lap. And then there was a Canada in 97, I think, that finished under or Canada has, I think, finished under the safety car in the past.
Yeah, 99, 97. I think there was also one in Melbourne that...
Was that the one that Jensen won?
Yeah, I think it was one of the ones that Button won.
Yeah. So, it very, 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 very rarely happens. But they, do you get into that situation? Because I'm a firm believer that if you have a rule on the first lap of the race, that rule should be the same as the last lap of the race. So if you have a safety car at the first lap of the race, then it needs to go through the same procedures as the last lap of the race. Just because you're near the end of the race, personally, I don't think that should come into play. So if you want to guarantee yourself an exciting finish to the race, do you stop all the cars on the grid and make them restart, with 1 lap to go? But then you have to do that on every safety car period, which I don't know if they'd want to go to those extremes. Then almost turn it into like a NASCAR style thing where they have the standing the restarts. Every time there's a yellow flag out there, so they have to come up with a procedure that fits every possible set of circumstances and not try to manipulate the race. Would you love to have seen Leclerc and Verstappen battle it out for a couple of laps there at the end with Leclerc on the fresher tyres and Max on the older tyres? Yeah, you'd love to see it. But it was under the current regulations, it would and should never have happened.
Correct. Yeah. And I think IndyCar and Formula One both have this same problem when it comes to any kind of overtime rule where it's just the fuel is so tight.
Yeah.
These Formula One guys, they probably got less than a pint of fuel in the car at the end of the race. They calculated that close, and IndyCar is the same way.
And they underfill the cars in Formula One as well, because Formula One, you have a maximum amount of fuel you can use, but you also have a maximum amount of rate of fuel that you can use. So you can't, you can't burn too much fuel too quickly. Red Bull got caught out by that 6 or 7 years ago with that fuel flow sensor that they introduced. So, and also in Formula One, of course, you can't refuel. If you run out of fuel, you run out of fuel. And we've seen on a number of occasions, you look back to, I think it was Seb Vettel in Hungary last year, who actually got disqualified from the race because he didn't have enough fuel left in his car post-race. So it is a big issue. So the only way you can get it is to stop the cars, with 3 or 4 or 5 laps to go, whatever it is. And again, you can't, I'm a very firm believer that you can't have there's less than 5 laps to go, so this is the rule. Whereas, there's 15 laps to go, this is the rule. I don't think you can do that.
I think you can do that.
But I think that
I think that if
everything.
Yeah, I was going to say, but I think that if that is written in the rules, you take out that, this is like when they do this in IndyCar, they decide to throw the red to preserve the finish, and they've done it. They've done it at Indianapolis a couple times, and other times they didn't do it. Just depending on the situation. But if you have,
if you have my head of some of the 500 red flags, that, like, especially this year when they red flagged it with like 3 to go.
Yeah. But it did set up an exciting finish. But then again, you figure a couple years ago, right, when Dixon and Sato were fighting and they didn't red flag it, but you had a perfectly good explanation for that because the pit wall, the pit lane attenuator wall was destroyed.
And it was an injury ordeal with Piggott.
Exactly, right. You had an injured driver. The time it would have taken to clean that up, they'd have been fighting the sunset.
Yeah, it was already beginning to sunset, so they were a race against time, and something like that would probably take about an hour and a half. And on top of that, they had to bring everybody back to pit road, but it's already clogged up pretty bad with the debris and everything. That was just not possible.
Right. Plus, you know what? They didn't have anybody in the stands to worry about getting mad. That was the empty stand Indy 500 in August, if you recall.
Oh yeah.
Yep. So, but anyway, but it is, I hate to say NASCAR has it right because I hate the overtimes, because all the overtimes, every restart leads to a crash or leads to another overtime. I think that's ridiculous, but I do like the fact that they don't end under yellow. But I don't like the fact that sometimes your 500-mile race is actually, 518 miles or whatever the shit, So, yeah, I mean, there's an answer in there somewhere. But Richard, to your point that the rule on the last lap should be the same as the rule on the first lap, I think there's some wiggle room in there to preserve the finish. But it's got to be consistent. And, if there's this many laps to go, like when there's only 3 to go, I just ended under yellow, if you ask me. But if there's 8 to go or 10 to go, and you can preserve that, and still not fight the daylight, I don't think that's a horrible thing.
But then what happens if you're at an Austria where, a lap is, 2.5 miles, or you're at a Spa where it's 5 miles?
Well, this is true. I guess you can write the rule for how much race distances last. See, this is why you and I don't write rules for the FIA.
We just critique them. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So we got a couple. We got a couple weeks off, right? And then we're headed to Singapore. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. Birthday weekend. I think it's on October 2nd.
Singapore is because we're not in Russia on the 25th of September, so it's the 2nd of October. They're in Singapore under the lights, and then Japan the following weekend.
Yeah, and those 2 races will have a champion crowned more than likely.
Yeah, by the time we get to the States in November, it'll be over. So
yeah, all 3 Formula titles will be decided by that point.
Yep, but you got to hand it to Max. I mean, this guy, or to the Red Bull team, really, he's he's been bulletproof.
Yeah, and I think the big talk after that championship is, can he break the record for most wins in the season?
Which is what? How many? What's the record for wins in the season?
Isn't it like 12 or 13 by Hamilton or Vettel?
One of those. It's got to be one of those two guys, yeah. Or does Schumacher have any 10-win plus seasons? I'm sure he must have.
Ooh, must be up there, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. So, because Schumacher never let his teammate win, you had the 1 year where McLaren won 15 of the 16 races, but those were split.
88, yeah.
Yeah, those were split between Prost and Senna. So,
yeah,
true. Yeah, but I mean, records are made to be broken, So,
highest number of wins per season, yeah. So 13. So Seb and Michael Schumacher both share 13 races. 2004 for Schumacher, 2013 for Seb. Although Schumacher's 13 wins were in 18 races, and Seb's were 13 wins in 19 races. And then if you want to look at another statistic, Ascari in 1952, I know you remember it well, Frank. Ascari won 6 out of 8. So Ascari has the highest percentage wins per season.
And the most consecutive wins that's still Vettel, isn't it? And I think he's tied with Ascari, because if you take and loop the wins from the end of one season to the beginning of the next, consecutive wins like that, I think it's 8.
Yeah, because I think Vettel won out in 12 or 13. He won out. So
it says Seb Vettel won most consecutive, I think. I'm not trying to say I know this off the top of my head. 9 wins from the 2013 Belgian Grand Prix to the 2013 Brazilian Grand Prix.
Right, and he broke a record that Ascari had of 8.
Yeah,
but same thing, looped over 2 seasons. So, but that's 9. I mean, Max is up to 5 right now, with no signs of slowing down. He can certainly break that record and the record for most wins. Are there enough races left for him to? Yeah, I believe there are.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6 races left. Yeah,
he's got how many wins right now?
5 in a row, so he can get to 11
in a row. Yeah, how many wins does he have on the season?
Oh, jeez.
Let's see, I think Leclerc has 2, Perez has 1, Sainz has 1.
He has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yes, if he wins
3 more, he breaks the record. Yeah, so
that's from a lot more races.
Exactly,
22 races.
Right.
If he wins the next 2, then he would tie Schumacher's 13 from 18.
There you go.
It's going to be tough for Hamilton to keep that streak alive unless they put a whole race together where they're up the ante over Red Bull at this point. Because right now the threat to Verstappen is honestly more Hamilton than Leclerc at this point. Because we know Ferrari, they're going to do Ferrari things like Denver Broncos did Ferrari things on Monday night.
I'm gonna say that for the football podcast. All right, so we are out of time. So NASCAR is going to be coming to Bristol, and that'll be our main focus of next week's show. Formula One will have the weekend off, and the IndyCar will have the rest of the season off. But I'm sure we'll begin to get some off-season news coming out of that series. Some of these seats for 2023 fall into place, and maybe we'll have a decision on the Alex Palou thing in the next couple of weeks. But until then, I want to thank you, Richard and Louise. I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network. I want to thank iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. And I want to thank you folks that listen to us every week. But until next week, good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com. Enter website.